Before we get started, a quick heads up. Presidents Unplugged now has merch. If you want to support the show and represent the podcast in your daily life, you can at presidentsunpluggedmerch.com. That is presidentsunpluggedmerch.com. Now, let's get into today's episode. Some historians call James K. Polk the most efficient president in United States history. But does being the most efficient president automatically make you the best president? And on today's episode of Presidents Unplugged, we're talking about the efficiency, the expansion, the morality, the difficulties, and all the tension that created the character of America's 11th president, James K. Polk. Let's do this. Born in Mecklenburg County, representing the great state of North Carolina, and raised in Tennessee, James Knox Polk was a pretty sick child. At age 17, he underwent a surgery to remove bladder stones. Now, surgeries today are pretty straightforward. You get put to sleep, you get back up, and it's just done. But James Polk did not have the leisure of anesthesia. The doctor pretty much just gave him some brandy, patted him on the back, and said, "Let's do this." Yeah, that's pretty traumatizing. And it also left Polk infertile, meaning him and his wife never had any children. These surgeries and these tough, sick conditions for Polk left him pretty sad and pretty unmotivated. And by around middle school age today, James K. Polk didn't even really know how to read or write. This might make some people think that James Polk didn't really have a chance. But eventually, he developed the discipline, the structure, and that work ethic that made him who he was. Especially when attending the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, graduating at the top of his class. What a turnaround. After graduating, even though he had studied for mathematics and the classics, Polk realized what he really wanted to do with his life: politics. Around this time, when he was entering politics himself, the president was Andrew Jackson. And Polk was so inspired by Andrew Jackson and what he was doing for the country. Polk had grown up in Tennessee, and so had Andrew Jackson. Jackson represented the common man who had worked his way up to become the president. Polk saw Jackson as an inspiration. And Polk could have never imagined that in a few years' time, he would have the same title as his hero. In the Andrew Jackson episode all the way back in season 1, we talked about Andrew Jackson's nickname, Old Hickory. Polk was so reflective of Andrew Jackson as a person that he would later gain the name Young Hickory. And this was quite the compliment. Andrew Jackson was seen as this larger-than-life figure in the 19th century. Even though today we know about Andrew Jackson as this fiery, dueling, having a swearing parrot kind of president, he's well-respected today, but he was even more well-respected in the 19th century. So being reflectively called a younger version of him was a great compliment for James Polk. He wanted to be just like him. So Polk continued to rise through Congress and eventually became the Speaker of the House. After a few years of being the Speaker of the House, Polk changed directions. He left the speaker position and ran to be the governor of his home state, even though he was born in North Carolina, of Tennessee. Polk loved being the governor of Tennessee, representing his own state well and proud. Until re-election came around, when he lost the re-election bid for governor. Oh gosh, this is pretty much his dream. He loves the governor position, and now he's lost. What is he gonna do? James K. Polk pretty much thought his political journey was over. He wasn't even 50 years old. He'd lost the re-election bid, and it looked like he'd never do anything in politics again. Until the election of 1844. In this election, the Democratic Party really struggled to unite behind one candidate. Former President Martin Van Buren, who created the two-party system and the Democratic Party, decided to just leave it. That makes sense. Martin Van Buren ran under the Free Soil Party. And as we know in American history, third-party candidacies don't go very far. So Van Buren was off the ticket. He was not an option. There was also Henry Clay, who ran with the Whig Party. The Whig Party in American history at this point was pretty close to transforming into the Lincoln Republicans. So all we have is a third-party candidate and Henry Clay. With this political confusion, somebody emerged as a sort of compromise candidate, a surprise to the American people. James K. Polk. Polk became what historians call a dark horse candidate, one that nobody expects to win until they win. Andrew Jackson and Martin Van Buren, as we heard last season, were best buddies. But here's the deal. Andrew Jackson tended to agree with James Polk more than Van Buren, as Van Buren had changed to this free soil third-party candidacy. So with Andrew Jackson on your side, anything's possible. But at the same time, it was still a close election between Henry Clay and James Polk. Henry Clay in American history is known as a close but no cigar figure. He ran in 1824 and lost. He ran in 1832 and lost. But he's running for a third time in 1844 as a 67-year-old man. It's his time to shine until James K. Polk rains on his parade and wins the 1844 election. I'm sorry, Henry Clay. I do feel bad for you, but this is James Polk's episode. James Polk had defied the odds and went from a politician that everyone thought would never do anything again to being the President of the United States. Nothing was going to stop him now. Abraham Lincoln was 6'4". Franklin Delano Roosevelt served as president for more than 4,000 days. Those are facts. But here's another fact. The fact that Presidents Unplugged has an Instagram page. If you want updates on the show and announcements about what's coming next, follow us at Presidents_Unplugged. That is Presidents_Unplugged. I'll see you there. Polk's personality really began to shine once he entered the White House in early 1845. Polk ran his presidency with intense focus and control. Some people called him a control freak, and I 100% agree. He was known for working extremely long hours, mostly because he would micromanage not only his own life, but everybody's life around him. James K. Polk would stay up late making sure the people around him were working expeditiously. Expeditiously is our word of the day. Expeditiously, acting with speed and efficiency. James Polk never relaxed. And later in this episode, we'll see how that nonstop work ethic might have actually killed him, allegedly. When James Polk was president, he didn't accomplish everything alone. A woman by the name of Sarah Childress was recommended to James Polk by none other than Andrew Jackson, who knew our seventh president was such a matchmaker. She played a major role in shaping the atmosphere of the White House. Because looking back at history, Polk was just kind of this normal, down-to-earth guy. If he walked in the room, Polk was not going to stand out. He just wasn't that kind of person. So Sarah Polk had a little idea. What if, to build a more formal presidential image, why don't we give the chief executive a theme song? Sarah Polk was one of the major contributors that added "Hail to the Chief" to the tradition of the presidential position. Whenever the president walks in the room, you know the song. It's the intro for Presidents Unplugged. How could you not know "Hail to the Chief"? But other than James Polk's wife, Polk was aggressive. Very, very aggressive. Polk strongly believed in expansion. Make the United States as big, as widespread as it possibly can be. During his presidency, he pushed the United States to acquire as much territory as possible. And while many history books say that Polk successfully completed every single one of the major goals he set, historians today debate how exaggerated that claim really became over time, because most of these stories about Polk's perfection, expansion, and efficiency were exaggerated in political writings later in the century after he'd already passed away. But no matter what books you're reading about James Polk, one thing remained true. James K. Polk wanted land. Whether it was Texas, California, Oregon, or even at one point Cuba, Polk wanted the United States to grow as large as it possibly could. The idea of manifest destiny, from sea to shining sea. I'm not talking about Johnny Cash's song. I'm talking about from the Atlantic to the Pacific. We are destined to obtain all 48 intercontinental United States. That is manifest destiny, and James Polk was a major contributor to what made it so prevalent in the Americans' minds. Conquer, conquer, conquer. Whoa, James Polk, slow down, dude. You're adding a third to the country? How are you even doing this? Instead of negotiating with Mexico on how the United States could obtain Texas through, buying it or something like that, James Polk decided, hey, if we get into a war with Mexico, we'll probably win. And we can obtain that territory that way. Thus starts the Mexican-American War. Many critics at the time believed that Polk intentionally pushed the situation towards war, giving him a reason to conquer the territory that we now know as Texas. So how did this even happen? Mexico claimed that the border of Texas was on the Nueces River, while the United States claimed that the border of Texas was the Rio Grande, which was much farther south than Mexico's border. Now, where does this become a problem? It becomes a problem when James Polk sends troops under Zachary Taylor, the future 12th President of the United States. Also in his group, the future 18th President of the United States, the then Lieutenant Ulysses S. Grant. Polk decided to send them and another group of men into disputed territory between those rivers. To American leaders, they were going under United States territory. We're still in Texas. I mean, the border's at the Rio Grande. But wait, Mexico thinks the border is way up higher. So the United States is entering Mexican territory. Do you see where the problem comes? Eventually, fighting broke out when the Mexican troops said Americans were on their land, so they attacked. American soldiers were killed. Polk used this attack to justify war, telling Congress that American blood had been shed and we need to go to war now. But if you think the entire country was behind Polk on this, you'd be wrong. A up-and-coming senator from Illinois named Abraham Lincoln, there is a lot of future presidents in this episode, made a claim. Where exactly did these Mexican soldiers attack America? Was this Mexico's fault? Or was James Polk just using a warmongering tactic to grab up as much territory as he possibly could, knowing that he could win this war? This became known as the Spot Resolutions, and it actually brought Abraham Lincoln's name up the charts a little bit. But still, Lincoln was not in agreement with Polk at all, demanding to know the exact spot where this bloodshed supposedly happened. Critics who supported Lincoln in this argument said that Polk had manipulated the situation to gain support for a war. And as I said, Polk was seen as a warmonger, somebody aggressively pushing their country towards conflict for territorial or economic gain. And honestly, these debates still exist today. You really can't deny how much the United States expanded during Polk's presidency. I mean, we almost added a third to our nation in total. But the methods used to gain that area are where the arguments begin. I mean, Polk's political narrative was crazy. He became one of the earliest presidents to ever aggressively shape the public opinion and use, quote, selective truth to build support for his policies. You want to know what selective truth is? Lying. While I'm not saying all presidents before James Polk were perfect truth tellers, James Polk was the first president to reach the White House that often lied directly to people's faces to get what he wanted. This is literally what corrupt politicians are known for today. All these lies and manipulation turned into efficiency. After the war, the United States gained massive territory in the Southwest, permanently changing the map of North America. But chronologically, Polk was not done expanding, because in the timeline, the Oregon Territory was conquered after the Mexican-American War. Britain and the United States both claimed parts of this Oregon area, but after negotiations, Polk once again expanded American territory. And if you can't tell already by the 14,000 times I've mentioned it this episode, James K. Polk loved expansion. Polk also became the first president to ever publicly commit to only one presidential term. Around the beginning of American history, we had a lot of two-term presidents, and some wanted to be two-term presidents, but didn't have the support to get there. But Polk openly admitted that he wanted to commit one term to the American people. And after 4 intense years, Polk kept his promise. In his eyes, his presidency had been more than a success. And truthfully, he did a lot in 4 years. He'd expanded the country dramatically, which led to the reshaping of the map and completed many of the goals he'd set to accomplish. But when James Polk left office on March 4th, 1849, his health rapidly declined. And I mean rapidly. Only 103 days later, after his presidency, James Polk died at just 53 years old. James Polk has the shortest post-presidency in American history. Today, many historians generally believe he died from cholera, combined with years of nonstop stress and that efficiency that was pretty much his motto. Polk's body simply was just not able to keep going. James K. Polk may have literally worked himself to death. And on this week of Presidents Unplugged, you might be thinking, what can I actually learn from this guy in my daily life? It's not to use selective truth or lying to get an advantage or to become a warmonger every single day. What we can learn from James K. Polk is his dedication. Most people, if they struggled through the kind of painful surgery Polk experienced, or if they lacked an early education, or if they lost re-election as the governor of Tennessee, they probably would have given up. But James K. Polk continued to fight until the very end. Now, you should definitely not work yourself to death like Polk might have done. But his efficiency, discipline, and determination are things we can still take inspiration from today. James K. Polk changed the United States forever. And whether you admire or criticize him, his impact on American history is impossible to ignore. And that is why James K. Polk is so important. Tune in next Friday as we talk about John Adams, the founding father who created some of the most debated laws in American history, and somehow managed to be both highly respected and heavily criticized at the exact same time. We'll also talk about his awkward personality and the fact that he was the first president to live in the White House. How did this stubborn and brutally honest founding father help shape America before, during, and even after his presidency? Learn about that and much more next week on Presidents Unplugged. I'm Ty Svensson, and I'll see you soon. God bless. Thank you for listening to Presidents Unplugged. If you enjoy content like this, give us a follow on Apple Podcasts or Spotify today to be notified that your favorite presidential podcast has released new content. Now, when do we release new content? Once a month, maybe twice a year, maybe even once a year? No. We release new content every Friday at 1 p.m. for my American enthusiasts to enjoy. Come join me on our dive into making American history the most entertaining and interesting subject to learn every single week. I'm Ty Svensson, this is Presidents Unplugged, and I'll see you soon.